This is News Talk with Bruce DePoint.
Welcome in on this Friday. Hi, everybody. Good to have you with us today. We've got a lineup we're really happy with, and so we're glad that you are there. We begin with the latest on the investigation into that Russian plane crash in Egypt that killed 224 people. The possibility that a terrorist bomb brought down the plane looks increasingly likely, and if true, will be one of the worst acts of terrorism since 9/11. Today, new calls for increased airport security for all foreign flights bound for this country, those flights of increasing concern with the massive number of U.S. travelers that will be in the air for the Thanksgiving holidays. Correspondent Lana Zak has been following the U.S. response from Washington.
The possibility that a terrorist bombed down the Russian plane in Egypt is sending international shockwaves with implications for U.S. travelers.
I think there is a possibility that there was a bomb on board, and we're taking that very seriously.
The Department of Homeland Security is expected to announce plans to tighten regulations on U.S.-bound flights from international airports as early as today.
The Obama administration is reviewing a number of different steps that we can take to enhance security for commercial flights bound for the United States from certain foreign airports.
With more than 25 million Americans expected to fly over the Thanksgiving holiday, the need for vigilant security could not be greater. Here in the U.S., baggage is sent to special TSA underground screening rooms. Each bag run through explosive detection scanners. But the standards at foreign airports vary widely. And even here in the U.S., security has been raised since the summer when TSA screeners were found to miss hidden objects 95% of the time. And internationally, the list of countries halting travel in and around Egypt's Sinai Peninsula is growing, following the British lead. While back in Russia, communities began to bury their dead, the first of hundreds to come.
Correspondent Lana Zak there, and joining us now here, J.J. Green. He is, of course, national security correspondent for WTOP. Welcome back. Great to have you here. Big mystery, big tragedy, huge loss of life, and there's so much we don't yet know about what happened to this jet.
There have been some big developments overnight, one of which was a French intelligence expert saying essentially he believes that the U.S. and Britain perhaps had secret intelligence that a bomb was on board, but did not relay it. We don't know that for sure, because in looking at that scenario, if there is a suspicion of something like that, security agencies usually communicate that kind of thing to one another. Regardless of what kind of political situations are going on, they usually talk to each other about that. So I don't know whether that's true or not. The other element is Russia has suspended all flights to Egypt at this point, and a part of their reason for doing that is they want to get a handle on this group that supposedly is loyal to the Islamic State that's working in the Egyptian Sinai, in the desert. The U.S. has something like 700 troops there, and other organizations have troops there as well to try to make that a safer place. So what we've done is learned a lot about this group, and it's a very savvy group. It could very well have been involved in planting some kind of explosive device on this plane, or perhaps paying someone else to do it. That's one of the other elements we've learned this week. ISIL is worth $2 billion. What they can't do themselves, they perhaps can pay others to do.
And there's been a lot of scrutiny, of course, of who had access to the plane immediately prior to the doomed flight, who was in the airport, who was on the tarmac, who in an official capacity, who might have been there, who shouldn't have been there. All of this. And this is just one piece of the puzzle. I mean, investigators have been on the scene since the beginning, and whether it was terrorism or a catastrophic malfunction, an accident, so to speak, what we get out in the public sphere is that they just don't know.
The confusing part of this is the fact that the Russians and the Egyptians came out in the very beginning and said what did not happen prematurely. The Russians said on the day of the crash that it wasn't pilot error, there was no technical malfunction. A couple of days later, satellite imagery supposedly surfaced suggesting that there was an explosion on board, boxing in the Russians. The Egyptians come up later saying that there was no missile involved. And we did indeed find out later that there was no traveling heat signature to match that heat flash that satellites detected. So what the Russians essentially said early on had to be tested, had to be proven, and there hasn't been any proof to that at all, that there was no pilot error, that there was no catastrophic or technical issue on the plane. But what we have learned from British intelligence is that they believe that there is a very strong likelihood a bomb was placed on the plane based on intelligence they have. The U.S. suggests as well it has intelligence that ISIL had been talking about this and planning about this. And I understand the kind of things they've been talking about are classified. Specifically, the fact that they learned about this chatter through classified venues. So it appears as though they were talking too much about what took place and had too much knowledge about what took place for them to be completely in the dark, which is why I think the U.S. is standing behind this idea that they have intelligence that ISIL may have been involved in this.
If it turns out that this was terrorism, will folks who are able to connect the dots in an intelligent way say that Russia's coming to the aid and assistance of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, that this is, at the risk of oversimplifying, payback for that?
From an intelligence and a terrorism perspective, it's not a stretch to do that, because the Islamic State, as we've discussed already, is a very rich organization, and it's a very brutal organization, and it has gotten the attention of some of the world's best terrorists and most, shall we say, vicious terrorist groups and individuals in the world. They have already said on numerous occasions they would essentially get revenge against Russia for getting involved in the scenario in Syria, and then going after groups that had supposedly nothing to do with ISIL. That's galvanized even those who disagree with ISIL to join this fight against the Russian government and the Russian military. Many have equated it to what happened back during the 80s with the Russian invasion of Afghanistan and that galvanization that took place at that point. With all of the terror groups and jihadists and militant groups bonding together against that common enemy, many are equating what's taking place now as this. Basically, what's been happened as a result of Russia's entry into Syria is that they've supercharged this whole militant movement in Syria.
With some believing that Vladimir Putin is sort of making this up as he goes along. A lot of big talk, a lot of bravado, a conspicuous show of force. But the question remaining, is this part of a plan, or is he sort of taking it day by day in a very sort of irresponsibly ad hoc fashion? Can you talk to us? We've got a couple minutes left. I know folks are starting to think about holiday travel and security. Right. This is obviously having a ripple effect, an impact on the sort of security that airline travel will get going forward. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, there are going to be some adjustments. We don't know what they are, and what might be adjusted, we might not see it. But what we will see are longer lines, most likely. What we will see are more eyes looking at us longer and looking at our belongings longer, and those eyes may not necessarily be human eyes. And also those who get through security quickly may not, some of those who get through security may not get through so quickly because of this need to spend a little bit more time scrutinizing. And I got to say this really quickly about this scenario. Vladimir Putin knows what he's doing. He's a very smart guy, and his apparatus is very smart. The issue that's really come to the fore now, which has complicated security for the U.S. and has raised the need for the U.S. to strengthen its security protocols, is politics has found its way into the security scenario between Russia, Egypt, the rest of the world. This scenario could very well continue to blow up, no pun intended, as the weeks and months go on because of what's happening in Syria. But as we look at what's happening in the U.S. today, expect more difficulty getting through security, at least in the short term.
Is there a significant gap, if you will, or is there if you look at the airports where security is tight and where the security process is state of the art, and those at the other end of the spectrum, how broad is that spectrum?
Pretty big. And the problem is this. John Pistol, before he left as TSA administrator, told me specifically on numerous occasions that the U.S. is really good at what it does. And Peter Neffinger, the new TSA administrator, told me personally, they are very good at what they do. The problem is is the system. Flying from one place to another, you go through airports, you go through other countries' systems that aren't up to par. So what they're trying to do is to get these other countries to to build capacity in those places. Sharm el-Sheikh, supposedly one of the best in the world, but at the same time, sources have been telling me people have been able to buy passes around security in Sharm el-Sheikh and in other parts of Europe, or rather other parts of Egypt's Egyptian aviation system to get around screening. So who knows if this was what took place in Sharm el-Sheikh.
A lot of questions still to be answered as investigators probe this downed Russian plane, 224 lives lost. Was it an accident? Was it terrorism? All that still to be determined. J.J. Green, he covers the national security beat. He has it nailed down for our friends over at WTOP. Always great having you here.
Pleasure to have you talk to me, and thank you for your knowledge on this.
Well, appreciate your keeping us informed. J.J. Green at WTOP will step aside. We are right back after this.